So now we've seen what we're about to do, what we're going to do is add our first handler. And this handler is going to bring back a list of our activities from the database. Now all of our application logic is going to go inside our application project. And this is the one that we're going to store all of our handlers inside. And what we also need at this moment is access to Mediator, which is going to allow our API controllers to send requests to our application project. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to open up the command shell and we're going to make use of NuGet Package Manager to add the Mediator package into our application project. So I'm going to click on Add Package and then I'm going to search for Mediator spelt with a TR at the end instead of TOR. And then what I want to add from inside here is not the Mediator package itself, but it's the one especially designed to work with ASP.NET Core dependency injection. So I'm just going to scroll down this list. And what I'm looking for is Mediator extensions.microsoft.dependency injection. And this is the one that we want to install. So I'm just going to select this and press return. And I'm just going to take the latest version at the time of recording, which is 7.0.0. And we want to install this into our application project. So I'll select this as well. And then we can go ahead and restore to make this available to our application project. And once that's complete, what we'll do is start to work on creating our first handler. Now I'm just going to delete this class1.cs, we're not going to need this, and move this to trash. And inside our application project, because this one's going to get quite large, because it is where all of our business logic is going to go, I'm going to start dividing up our .NET Core code into folders. And each feature inside our application project is going to have its own folder. So I'm just going to call this one Activities. And inside this folder, I'm going to create a new C# class, and all I'm going to do is just call this one List. And this is the kind of naming convention I'm going for inside our .NET Core projects for our handlers. Just really simple names that describe what they're doing, and because it's inside our Activities folder, then it's pretty obvious that this is going to be a list of activities. So what we want to do with Mediator is we want a query and we want a handler for this particular query. So I'm going to create a class called Query, and this is a nested class inside our list class, and it's going to be of type iRequest. And iRequest is a Mediator interface, and we need to tell this what we want to return from our query. And in this case, it's going to be a list of activity. And then we can just close off this particular class because we don't need to provide this with any properties, because we're just going to go out to our database and retrieve a list of activities, and we don't need to provide it with any other parameters other than that. So I'm just going to bring in domain and system collections generic. And now that we have our query, what we need to create next is our handler. So I'm going to say public class handler, and this is going to be an iRequest handler. And for the types parameters in here, we need to tell it about our query, and we also need to specify what we're going to return from this handler, and it's going to be a list of activity, just like we did above. And we're getting a red underline here because this is an interface that we need to implement. So I'm just going to use the quick fix and say implement interface. And then this creates a handle method inside our handler class. So we get two things inside here as the parameters. We get our query request. And if we had any properties that we added to our query class, they would be available inside this request object. And we also have this thing called a cancellation token, which I'm going to completely ignore for the time being, and we'll talk about this very soon. Now, in our handler, we need to get access to our data context, and we're going to inject our data context into our handler. So what we need to do is we need to generate a constructor for our handler, and we need to pass in our data context inside here. Same way we did it in our values controller earlier on, but from this point forward, our API controllers are going to be extremely dumb. They're going to know nothing about our data context or our database or our logic. They're just going to simply be responsible for receiving HTTP requests and sending out HTTP responses. That's going to be the sum total of their responsibility. And all of the logic is going to be contained inside these handler objects. So I'm going to bring in persistence for our data context, and then I'm just going to initialize the field from parameter, just as I've done before. And I'm also going to remove this dot because it's redundant in this particular case. Now, inside our handler, what we want to do in here is just get a list of our activities and return them. So I'm going to say var activities equals await, and because we're using an asynchronous method here, we also need to use the async operator on our method, and then I'll say await context.activities.toList async. And I'll also need to bring in Entity Framework Core to make use of that particular method. And then all I need to do is return the activities. And this is our handler that's responsible for currently just going out and getting all of our activities from the database and returning them. So now we've got our handler in place, what we're going to look at next is creating an activities controller that's going to contain our endpoints that receive the HTTP requests and send out the HTTP responses. And we'll look at that next.